when I was in yeshiva, Rebbeinu was nifter that year. Whenever a big yeshiva was nifter, we had it twice. We had it when the Pshner was nifter. The whole yeshiva went to the Levaya. So it was like a major field trip. And you would meet your friends from every yeshiva in the region, because it would be like a yeshiva convention, because everybody would come. And it was a lot of fun. But I remember the Hespedim. I remember the Hesped of Rav Kalevsky on a Ruderman. And I remember he said when I was a rookie Rebbe, and I just got hired, I found it so time-consuming to prepare shir that I didn't have any time to learn for myself. And because of that, I was very not happy. I wasn't happy with myself. It wasn't working for me. So I went to Rav Ruderman to tell him this is just not working out. So he said, so all you focus on all day is preparing your shir? And I said, yes. He said, wow, that's beautiful. So the Haflah says in his Atama that it says in the Gemara, in Doimel Rabach, the Malach Hashem Tzavakais, Oz Tzavakais Torah Mipihu. If your Rebbe is like a Malach, only then should you seek to learn Torah from him. What does it mean if your Rebbe is like a Malach? A person is a person, not a Malach. So the Haflah explains in a Bruderman Selover that a Malach is someone who has one task. He has one mission, and that's all he is designed to do. So that's what the Haflah meant. If your Rebbe is Kamalach Hashem Tzavak, is your whole effort, your whole day you put into preparing for your Talmidim, Oz Tavak is Torah Mipihu. So Klav said, then I was appeased. I felt much better, and then anyway I found more time. But that's how he said it. It was beautiful.
You said that story maybe 10 blot ago, not even.
That's Rav Kalevsky. Rav Kalevsky is your child. And the Chaim Tzvi Levowitz, his father Alex, learned in Baltimore. So he has some funny stories. Ruderman, we all know, at the end of his life couldn't see. So if he had to travel anywhere by plane, they would ask the airline to have an agent accompany him until someone from yeshiva was able to pick him up. So Alex tells me that he was once tasked to pick up the yeshiva. So he comes to the airport and they're waiting with him after you come out of arrivals. And they're sitting on a bench with him. And there's two women agents, one sitting on one side of him, one on the other side. Now he refused to sit between two women. So he stood up and moved over to sit beside them. And then they would get up, one of them would get up and move to the other side of him because they wanted to make sure that they're watching him. So Alex said, I didn't come and introduce myself. I wanted to watch and see how long it would go on. As they were going back and forth along the bench. And after a couple of volleys back and forth, okay, I came and introduced myself and I picked up their shoes. And his Rebbetzin, her name was Fegi. This is also a very famous story. She was a very feisty woman. And it was known that the Blazer Silver, the Zatzal, never ate food by anybody. He always brought his own food along. So he once went to her Brittaman's house and she sits at the table, puts out the plates and the cutlery, and she's about to serve him. She says, no, I bring my own food. So he takes his package of food out and he's ready to put it down on her plate. And she scoops up her plate and she scoops up the cutlery. She says, well, if you don't trust my kashrus, why should I trust your kashrus? You can eat on plastic. Zecher Tzadik Levracha. We built a beautiful yeshiva. Many Talmidim. They were related. I think he was a cousin to Rabbi Yaakov. They were all somehow related. They kept the yeshivas in the family. Okay.
It was the Rosh Yeshiva Mafia.
Okay, so we were just up to the shir of Chatzi, the sugya of Chatzi shir. So the Gemara started off commenting on the Mishnah that rather than say Yom Kippur ma'oichel boy v'ashoyse boy chayav koros, it uses a more subtle lashon of osir. The Gemara felt that it's not appropriate to use the word osir when in fact it's much more severe than osir. It's chayav koros. So the Gemara says, why does it use the word osir? We use the word osir because our Mishnah holds that Chatzi shir is osir min haTorah. And when are you chayiv koros if you eat a kaseh gasa, like the Mishnah says later on? What if you eat less than that amount? Are you allowed to eat that? The Mishnah tells you you're not even allowed to eat a smaller share, even though you're not going to eat the amount that's chayiv karish. You're not allowed to eat any amount at all. And if you hold that chatzi shir is asur min hatayra, then the Mishnah fits in beautifully. Zok to Gemara, we have the shita of Rish Lakish who holds chatzi shir is mutar min hatayra, which means lechatchila you're allowed to eat less than the shir of any type of food on Yom Kippur. The Isser only begins where the Chiyav Karish begins. So how would Rish Lakish explain our Mishnah? So the Gemara wants to suggest that even Rish Lakish who holds that Chasi Shir is Mutar Min HaTorah, it's going to be Asar Midrabanan. And therefore it's still appropriate, it's still appropriate for the Mishnah to use the word Asar because it's Asar Midrabanan to eat even a Chasi Shir. For the Gemara, if you're going to hold that Chatzi Shir is Asur Midrabanan, then we have a problem. You shouldn't be chayiv a korban shavua for it, and we're going to show you that you are. What is a korban shavua? The halacha is there's something called a shavuos bitui. It's one of the averos that lead to bringing a korban oil v'yair, and it's if someone swears that he will eat something and he doesn't eat, or if someone swears that he won't eat and he ends up eating. So it's really a shvua about just everyday things that doesn't have a real purpose. So if someone makes a shvua spita, it's fine. However, there's a concept that if someone is mushba v'oimid, if you make a shvua that you won't do something that's osher anyway, I won't eat nevela, so my shvua doesn't do anything because mushba v'oimid mahar Sinai, I'm already pre-sworn on this isser, so my shvua has no impact. So therefore, you wouldn't bring a korban shavua for it. Now, if we're talking about the type of shavuos that lead to a korban oil v'yared, I want to mention now because it'll be relevant later. There's another type of shavua that leads to a korban oil v'yared, and that is if you see testimony and you don't want to present that testimony, and the person who needs that testimony says, "Listen, you saw testimony. I want you to testify on my behalf." And he says, "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see anything." And then you ask him to swear that he didn't see anything, to deny that he actually has testimony, and he swears falsely, and then he's caught. He also brings a korban oil v'yared, and that's going to come into play a little bit later. But I'll call upon him. If you're going to say that there's an Isur D'Rabbanan on Chatzi Shir, it's going to conflict with the korban shvua. Allah matnan. Why did we learn? Shvua shaloi oichel. A person made a shvua, I will not eat. Now, if you made an open-end shvua, I will never eat, that's not a shvuas bitui at all, because that's a shvua that's already a shvuas bitui the moment it came out of your mouth, because it's impossible never to eat. It meant that this means you won't eat for a certain period of time. Let's say I won't eat. He made a shvua that he wouldn't eat for 24 hours. He ate isurim deraisa. Chayiv, he's chayiv al to korban shvua. Rab Shimon Poit, and Rab Shimon holds you're not chayiv for korban shvua. The Gemara right away challenged this brisa and asked, "Am I chayiv? How could you be chayiv if you swore that you wouldn't eat and you ate nevelos and treifos mushba ba'imid mahar Sinai? There you're already mushba ba'imid mahar Sinai. It was already also to eat nevelos and treifos shkotzim u'remotzim even before you made that shvur shalei oichel. So the shvur shalei oichel will not be chal on those things." So we had a problem there. Why is it that someone is chayiv and is over his shvuos bitui if he ate isurei achila? Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, all of these three tzaddikim said, the Amri, the koilel dvarim hamutarim im dvarim hasurim. He didn't only swear that he won't eat things that are asur, he said he won't eat anything at all. So since his shvu encompasses a larger, broader category of things, sure, there are some Isurei Torah that are swept up in his broad umbrella of Isur, but nevertheless, his shvu will be chal. And Rashi tells us because he holds koilo. Shvu shaloi oichel loibos shchuta v'loibos nevela the migu de chayla ahatera. Since the shvu is chal on all the foods that are mutter for him to eat, chayla nami ayisura, it's also chal on the nevelas, the trevis, the shkotzim, or emosim. Rab Shimon Poiter. Rab Shimon is the Tana in the Brisa that we quoted that says he's potter from a Shavuos Pita. Why is that? Unless lay Isser Koil. You don't say Isser Koil and below Amrin Amikut. The Shavuot that he swore not to eat will be chal on all foods that would be mutter for him to eat otherwise. But anything that was already also for him to eat, since Har Sinai, his Shavuot will not be chala. Before we go weiter, I forgot something important that Rav Pinchas Yosef pointed out to me yesterday, and that is the position of the Kohen Gadol when they're asking of him a shayla of the Urim V'Tumim. And I learned the Gemara like some Rishonim, but not like Rashi. And the Gemara said that he faced the Rebbeinu Shalom, he faced the Ma'ariv, and the king faced him. But if you look at Rashi, and I want to read Rashi inside, because Rashi says precisely not like the way I quoted. Klape Shechina, I'm on Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, the third line in Rashi from the very bottom of the page. And he says Klape Shechina means Klape Urim V'Tumim. He's facing the Urim V'Tumim, which means he's looking down at his chest. So he's not looking to the west, according to Rashi. According to Rashi, he's looking at his chest. The Shema Mefarish Shubasei Chachoshi. So that's where he was actually looking. So he was looking down to his chest, and then the Melech or the Shoyal was looking towards him. And I forgot to mention that yesterday. Okay. So it's either chest or west. They both rhyme. See, that's what should have been the title of yesterday's year. Look to the chest or look to the west. Or go chest, young man. Okay. Zog the Halil Gemara. So the three Amoraim, Rav, Shmuel, and Rabbi Yochanan explained the Tanakama. Why is a Shvuah Chal? Because it's Chal through Koil, because the Shvuah includes many other foods. For a Shlokash Amar, no, that will not work. The reason why by the Shvuah Shaloi Oicha we say Yischayev is because what are you chayiv for minat Torah? What is the isser of nevelas, trevish, katzim, or masim? That's only if you eat a shear. Here you made a shvuah that I'm even going to eat less than a shear. So therefore, it's chal my isser. My isser shvuah is chal because what I'm eating of the nevela trefa is not covered by the isser Torah, because the isser Torah is only going to cover for the shear, and I'm eating less than the shear. So you see, Reish Lakish clearly holds that you can explain the Rabbanan who holds that you're chayav a carbon shvuah because you're ushering with your shvuah something that would not have otherwise been ushered, because there is no issue deraisa on it. The Gemara's kasha here is, but is there not an issue derabanan? If you want to learn that Reish Lakish holds that by chasi shir, even though it's not asham in the Torah, it's asham derabanan, so this food will also be asham derabanan. That's the gist of the Gemara's kasha. We'll get to it as the Gemara fears us. But I'll call upon him clearly. Reish Lakish is saying here, since there's no issue deraisa, because you're eating less than a shear, that's something that you can answer with the shvuah. Correct. He's specifying even chatzi shear. And Rashi tells the Rabbanan hold that when you make a shvuah shaloi oichal, stam, that also means only a shear. So, but if you specify, I'm not even going to eat a chatzi shear, well, then your shvuah will prohibit you from even eating a chatzi shear. Correct. Oy b'stam, or the Rabbanan hold that when you normally swear that you won't eat, you by default mean a shear, so you have to specify that you won't eat a chatzi shear. But there are those who argue under Rabbanan. Oy b'stam, or you could say, speaking where he didn't specify in his shvuah, he just swore generally, I will not eat any foods. And alibid Rabbi Akiva, the Amar Adam Oyser Asar B'choshu. Or it could be following the Shita of Rabbi Akiva, who holds that whenever someone says, I won't eat, he doesn't only mean to say, I won't eat a shear. By default, it means he won't eat anything at all. Because he knows once you eat that first potato chip, you know how it goes. So I won't eat anything at all. So let's see the beautiful Rashi. If someone swears he will not eat, doesn't specify any amount, so the halach is oyser atzah b'choshu. By default, he means to aser himself from eating a mashu. We looked in a brisa. Shvuah shaloi oichel v'achal kolshu. If someone swore that he won't eat and he ate a mashu, Rabbi Kiva mechayev v'chal ben poikim. And that's the Rabbanon and Rebbe Kiva that Rish Lakish referred to a moment ago. Hilchach, our brayso that said you're chayiv if you made a shvuah not each chatzum or masum. Ikar Rabbanon Svirle, if you want to learn it like the Rabbanon, Mukmin Lebe Mefarish. We'll say it's speaking where the person who made a shvuah specified, I won't even need a mashu. The Ikar Rabbi Kiva Svirle, but if you're like Rabbi Kiva, who holds it automatically when you swear you won't need you mean a mashu, Mukmin Lei, I feel bestam, then we don't need to learn that the brayso that we quoted earlier is speaking where you specify. Rab Shimon Poiter, Rab Shimon argues on the Tanakama, and he says, regardless, you're potter from any carbon shvuah. Why are you potter? Rab Shimon l'tamei. Rab Shimon has his own shita. The Omer b'chol shehu nami mushba misinavi. Rab Shimon has a shita that the Isser Torah is always even on the mashu. The Tanya b'Meseches Makos. Rab Shimon Omer kol shehu l'makos. Every time there's an Isser Torah, even if you're a kolshu, you're chayiv malchus. There's a chayiv and an Isser b'daraisa to have a mashu of any type of Isser. Well, Amr Kazayis, this whole concept that Chazal taught us about a shir Kazayis, that only applies elul in carbon. That's like the chorus or the carbon if it's done b'shayim. The sphere leila Rish Lakish, the chatish are also b'darbanim. So now Rashi is fearing us to kasha. If Rish Lakish holds that chatishir is also b'darbanim, heichi muki lalaha the tani chayiv ba'oichel chatishir. How could he say that the reason why in our brayso you're chayiv, even though you swore that you won't eat isurim? It's because you ate a chatishir, and a chatishir is not mushba by midmar Sinai. All right, afalav mushba. You're mushba even on the chatishir. You're going to ask me how could you be mushba? It's only with Rabbanon, and the shvuah by Har Sinai was only for deraises. Dr. Rashi, mishum lav d'lo saser. You're mushba b'aimed because there's an iser to violate any takana that the Rabbanon made, and therefore you're mushba b'aimed. So according to this brayso, where we quoted Rish Lakish as saying that on the Chatzis Shir you can be chayiv a carbon shvuah, the problem is, according to Rish Lakish, if you're arguing that there's an Isser Rabbanon, you're right back where you started. Zok to Gemara, v'chi tema, even the Isle hetim in the Torah, kachayil carbon shvuah, and if you want to say that since there's a hetim in the Torah, it's not called mushba vaymed, and Rashi says, v'chi tema, even the Isle hetim in the Torah, and it's only with Rabbanon, ein zeh mushba b'Sinai, that's not called mushba b'Sinai, v'chi mishtaba alei, chayla shvuah u'mechayvala, if you're going to argue that an Isser Rabbanon, this Leisaser, is not considered mushba vaymed, and that's why, according to Rish Lakish, that's shot in the Rabbanon where you're chayiv, I'll prove to you otherwise. But now we learned, the question is it considered mushba vaymed mehar Sinai if it's only also midrabanan because of the Isser of Leisaser, or is it not considered mushba vaymed mehar Sinai? Why should not? Because they didn't at the time of Har Sinai. I don't think they made this takana yet. That's what I thought. I might be wrong, but that's why I'm understanding. In fact, more about Tanan we learned Shavuos Eidus, which once again is one of the averis that trigger a chiyuv to bring a carbon idol together. If I demand of somebody who could say Eidus and he refuses and he swears that he doesn't know Eidus, he'll be chayiv a carbon shvuah. But if I'm demanding the shvuah of apostle Eidus, like from a woman or from a guy, well, a guy wouldn't be a guy, but it's like from a woman or somebody else, or krivim, someone who's related, of course, that person would never have to bring a carbon shvuah because he was never obligated, nor would he be believed to say this in the first place. But when the Brisa speaks out, the Gemara asked Lamutimai, because the Mishnah had already listed off explicitly, krivim aren't mechuyev, nachim aren't mechuyev, and then the Brisa offers a general rule, re'uyin lahayit. So what additional case is the Mishnah trying to exclude from the carbon shvuah by adding in this catch-all phrase of re'uyin lahayit? It's to exclude a king. A king is potter from saying edus. The Gemara Sanhedrin, the Mishnah Sanhedrin, Rashi tells us, says loy meid v'loy meidin naisai. He doesn't say edus. You don't say edus on him. So that's what the Mishnah is trying to tell us, that a melech would not have to make a carbon shvuah, would not bring a carbon shvuah. If someone is a mesachek b'kuvya, who's considered a ganav midrabanan. Rashi says he's a gazla midrabanan. He's pasalagus, which means meikar din he's kosher, because it's not considered a gazlan unless you take an object from somebody, like it says vayigzal hachanis, miyar hamitri. You have to take an object from one person to the next. Mesacha bekovia is a smach lekanya. We're betting. Everyone who bets assumes he's going to win, and therefore midrabanan it's gzela. If you win a bet and you take those winnings, that's considered a gazlan midrabanan, and he's not believed to say edus. But midaraisa, he's a perfectly good witness. And we're saying here, the Achaba Yaakov is claiming over here that a Mesachik Bekuvia would not bring a carbon shvuah. In fact, the Gemara about Mesachik Bekuvia midaraisa michsa chazi, midaraisa is a perfectly good witness. V'rabbanan hu paslu, and he's only a gasla midarbanan. So technically, he is mechuyev to say this. Technically, he made a shvuah not to. He should be mechuyev. Nevertheless, v'loik a chayla la shvuah, and the shvuah won't be chal him. So you see clearly that even an Isur Midrabanan impacts the Shvu Deraisa. Dr. Gemara Shiny Yosam, no. Really, the Isur Midrabanan does not impact the Shvu Deraisa. And Rish Lakish shows that since Pachas Mikashir was only Asur Midrabanan, you could still make a Shvu on it, because it wasn't Asur Midraisa. It's not called Mushba Baimid. So why is it that you don't bring a carbon Shvuah if a Masachet Bekuvya swears falsely that he didn't have an Aegis? Shiny Yosem Domer Kro, there's a technicality here. It says Im Lo Yagid. The high lav ba'agadahu klal. What's the difference if it's midrabban or midaraisa? The fact is, his testimony is no longer valid, is no longer accepted, will no longer help the person who's demanding his testimony, because the Rabbanan say that he's not to be believed. So since his testimony will not have an impact, sure midaraisa it's a good testimony, but it still won't have an impact. They're not going to listen to him. They're not going to follow his word. So therefore, he cannot have the impact of an aid. Therefore, he cannot have the shvuah of someone who denies with a shvuah that he knows dates. So it's a technicality why the Rabbanan over there impacts the deraisa. But when it comes down to isurei achila that are mutar midaraisa, that are only asher midarbanan, when you make a shvuah to asher those as well, you've now put an isur deraisa on. So this is the shaila. We're going to get out into the shaila of Chatzi Shir. I mentioned on Shabbos that Rabbi Lowy remembered my bar mitzvah shuttle, and the bar mitzvah shuttle was on the sugya of Chatzi Shir. It was exactly on this Gemara. So I'll just share some tidbits along the way as it becomes Nagaya.
What's the mechanism, the power of the Rabbanan to aser this? Right? They couldn't make something aser mutter, but they can make something mutter aser. Is that what's like? Is that where we're going? Like the edus. They couldn't say.
Are you talking about are you talking specifically about the edus?
Well, the edus is a stepping stone to the next piece about getting back to the Chetzi Shir. It's using it as a proof that the Rabbanan.
The edus, they just said if someone who's a Masachah Bekuvit says testimony, we don't trust him.
Right, but deraisa we should.
Deraisa we should.
So what is that? What's the mechanism that the Rabbanan use? Because we're going to use that now to say they have the power.
For this mechanism, they can use. I guess they can use hefker, best, and hefker. Because that's in the Raisa. I'm asking Reuven. I'm bringing an aid that Reuven owes me money. I lent him money and Reuven didn't pay back. So really, the aid who's a Mesachah Bekuvia will be mechayev Reuven to pay me money, and the Rabbanan are saying no. Reuven doesn't have to pay you money. So that must be with the power of hefker, best, and hefker. Because they're saying
then what would it have to do? Then what would it have to do with Chetzi Shir?
It has nothing to do with Chetzi Shir. All we're trying to prove is that the Rabbanan has an impact on the Raisa, the Halacha. The question is if something is the Rabbanan, do we view it midaraisa as anything at all?
They wouldn't be able to say that something that is isur deraisa is mutter midrabanan. But they're saying that something that's mutter deraisa is aser midrabanan.
Correct.
It seems like it's almost like a shofal tase. We're just not going to pay any attention to what you're doing. But how we're not going to accept your edus.
Oh, okay.
Right. So we're just not going to accept your edus. Right. We see that also. I guess there are cases with Kiddush Chodesh where they may not accept the edus because they want it to be a different day. So you have like cases where they say we won't accept your edus. But it seems that the Gemara is trying to go from that to a stepping stone to Chetzi Shir, where the Rabbanan are also going to say that Midaraisa it's mutter, but Midarabanan we're going to answer it.
But I don't think we're focusing now on the reasoning behind why the Rabbanan did these things. We're going a layer above. Once they did that, once they made the halacha, do we consider that like it happened at Har Sinai, or do we not consider that like it happened at Har Sinai? So if we consider it like it happened at Har Sinai, so then we look at it that he's a mushba vaymet. But if we don't look at it like it happened at Har Sinai, then he's not mushba vaymet, even though it's also with Rabbanan. So there might be a different reason in every single case why the Rabbanan did what they did. That's not what we're comparing. We're one layer above that. Once that has been accomplished, how do we perceive the Rabbanan Dika Isser? Do we perceive it as being on the same level as the Deraisa, or do we say it came after the Deraisa?
Okay, thank you.
So now the Gemara is going back to the original assumption. The whole sugya started off because the Gemara was uncomfortable with the Mishnah using a lashon of Asr when really many of the items in the Mishnah there's a chiyuv kares on. Correct Gemara. Are you claiming that it's inappropriate for a Tana to use the word Asr when he's describing something that in fact is more severe, that has a chiyuv kares? I'm going to show you very explicitly that the Tana has no problem with that. But Tana we learned, referring to our case, even though all of these different activities, even though they're all asr, there's only an isr kares for the three items, oichel, shoisa, and oisam malacha. But clearly, the Mishnah is using asr on the oichel, shoisa, and oisam malacha as well, even though they're chayiv kares. So you see quite clearly that the Mishnah doesn't have a problem using the word asr to describe something that's chayiv kares. So this is what the Brisa means. When the Mishnah said asr, it was only referring on any of the items to chatzi shir, where in fact there is no chiyuv kares. Aval kashir, but if in fact you ate or drank a shir, then onish kares, then the word asr in the Mishnah is not appropriate, and then the Mishnah would have used the word chayiv kares. V'aval pisha onish kares, even though achila shtia and malacha has a chiyuv kares, ein onish kares ala oichel v'shoyse v'oisam malacha b'vad. However, the rest of the items in the Mishnah, the rechitza and the sicha, and the nilas sandal and the tashma shamita, those do not bring with them a chiyuv kares. They're always only asr, no matter what. Or you can say instead of saying that it's referring to chatzi shir, you can say ki katani asr ashayra. The word asr in the Mishnah is not really referring to the first cases of the Mishnah where there is a chiyuv deraisa and there is a chiyuv kares. I mean, rather the word asr is only referring to part of the Mishnah. Ashayra, the Tanu Rabbi Yosef, the Shar Sifrei, the Veirav. In other Sfarim, not in Taras Kahanim, but in other Perushim on the Torah, they learned Minayin Liyom HaKippurim she'asar b'rechitza v'sicha v'witness a sandal of Tash Shmita Hamad Leimer Shabbosa Shvus. So we know those things are asar, but they don't come with them. They don't bring with them a chiyuv kares. Let's just see Rashi about the Shar Sifri because it's a little bit of an interesting comment. Shar Sifri the lav Taras Kahanim. There's other midrashim that are not on Chumash Vayikra, Sefer Veidaber Ve'ela Dvarim, the medrash on other Chumash. Shabbosain, Begabe Inoi Ksiv. It says Shabbosain Legabe Inoi. So let's look at the pasuk. The Shabbos Shabbosain he, referring to Yom Kippurim. Shabbos Shabbosain he lachem ve'inisem esnafshay seichem chukas oilo. So we learn the Chehechi the Shabbosain ha'omer b'Shabbos. Just like when it says Shabbosain b'Shabbos, Asmechu be'Rabbanon. Shar malachash shalai hayu b'mishkan ve'ina malacha gvura. Just like additional isurim that aren't explicit in the Torah are also considered isurim deraisa. Hachanami shabbosan degabi inui. So too, when it uses the word shabbosan, when it's speaking about the inuyim, the chsiv shabbosan hu lachem ve'inisem lahoysev al inui achilu ushtiyakas. The shabbosan is telling us is giving us a signal that don't only answer those items that the Torah stated explicitly, like a chila and shtia, it also includes other isurim as well. We learned that from Shabboson, just like by Shabbos, there's a lot more than what meets the eye. So too, there's a lot more inuyim than what meets the eye, and the Gemara is going to elaborate on that on other days. Gufos up to Gemara. Chatzi shir. Let's get back to this shaila of chatzi shir. Rabbi Yochanan Omer also minator. Midaraisa, it's also even to eat a half a shear of chametz, a half a shear of nevela. It's also to eat those midaraisa. There might not be malchus, but according to Rabbi Shimon, there's malchus. But there might not be any malchus for it according to other Tanaim, but it's still also to eat. It's mutter to eat. Rabbi Yochanan Omer also minator. The svara is keeping the chazil tarufe isurei ka'achel. Since if you continue eating and you end up eating a shear, you have eaten an entire shear of Isser, which means that the first half of what you were eating was also Isser. That's one way to look at it. But another way to look at it, this chazal is, since if you continue eating, it's going to be also, you better stop eating now. Where does this make a huge nafkamina? What happens if we're very, very close to the end of the Yom Tov of Pesach, and it's impossible to eat a shear of chametz? It's impossible to eat a kazais of chametz. There simply isn't enough time. So can I start eating chametz now? If the whole reason why it would be also is because of chadzilus terufe, right now it's impossible for me to be mitzaref and eat an entire shear of chametz. It's impossible. So maybe with this svara of chadzilus terufe, they wouldn't be able to answer such a situation. But there's other gemaras that discuss eating and discuss a svara of achshave. Since I'm eating it, I give it a chashivas, and that's not in this sugya. It's brought down elsewhere. So my pshatel ended up with the stipler pointing out that if the whole iser of chati shir is chazilitz terufe, then maybe if you were eating chametz right at the end of Pesach, there wouldn't be an iser at all of chati shir. But if it was out achshave, by you eating something, it gives it chashivas, then maybe it would be awesome. Rishlakish Amar muter min Torah. It will be muter min Torah to eat a half a shear, because the Torah says achila amar achmana beleka. This is not considered an achila if you only eat a half a shear. Eisei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan had a kasha to Reish Lakish. Ainli ela kol sheyeshnei ba'onish yeshnei b'asar. I only know when it comes to the iser of chaylev that anything that's included in the oynish, anything that has a chiyuv kares for eating its chaylev, there's a lav for eating that same chaylev. But what about a kvi, which is a safek chay, safek behema, and we know that the iser chaylev doesn't apply to a chaya, or chatzi shir? Once again, there is no chiyuv kares for eating a half a shear of chaylev. Maybe you might think, since there's no chiyuv kares on it, so there's no isra at all. Talmud Loimer kol chaylev. So you seem to have a brisa that seems to say very explicitly that there's a pasuk in the Torah that says that chatzi shir is also min Torah. So how in the world is Reish Lakish going to deal with it? He held chatzi shir is not also min Torah. So Gemara Midirabon, and he'll learn that it's not really a limud to tell us midaraisa that chatzi shir is also min Torah. It's only the Rabban ukra smachta ba'alma, and the pasuk was only on the smachta, and really the pasuk teaches us something else. And hachinami mistaber. I'm going to prove to you that that's how you have to approach it. If you learn that kol chaylev is telling you that chatzi shir is also midaraisa, how about kvi? Kvi sveiku. If kvi is a safek chay, safek behema, it's the kral asuya sveika. The Torah doesn't have a safek. The Torah said the chaylev of a chaya is not iser, and the chaylev of a behema is iser. The Torah does not say, and if you're not sure, the Torah knows what a chaya is. The Torah knows what a behema is. So it doesn't make sense that the Torah would say a special word to be marba asafik. And to get clarity in this line, I'm just going to turn over for a second because Rashi, for this line, is at the top of Amar Aleph. Rashi says, also Kraler Sveka Bitmia, Adu Kamishmaya Sveku. Just because we have a suffix, if a kvi is a chay or a behema, the Torah knows, the Rebbeinu Shalom knows, I behema hava, I chay hava. So of course, it doesn't make sense that the Torah would need a pasuk to be marba kvi if it was a suffix. Zakta Gemara, Imi Shemha Allah Yirya. That's not a kasha. You know why? Kasavri. It must be that if you're going to have a special pasuk to be to aser the chaylev of a kvi, it's because kasavar kvi buried b'fnei atzmi. Kvi is not a suffix chay, suffix behema. It's in its own status, and we need the Torah to tell us that this third type of a behema, it's called gender fluidity, right? It's not exactly a chayit, it's not exactly a behema, it's a z. So the Torah is telling you that this third species also has an isra titchet. If you're not going to learn like that, hadam rebida ba'avid af kol lasuya kfi lagabi the isra of dam. The pasuk also has an extra word, and I'll just look at the back. Af kol lasuya kfi vi kfi sveikahu, and if kfi is a suffix, it's rechkol abuya sveika ela ber yishani hachanami ber yishani. Kvi is considered an independent berry. It's actually not a chay. It's not a behema, and you need the pasuk to tell us what the halach is for such a type of creature.
I think it's pronounced koi, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the article pronounces it koi, and I had a rebbe who said kvi, so I'm not sure what it is. So it's koi. You know, when I think of koi brothers who sell tractors at the 401 and the 400. But the article says that it's koi, K-O-Y. K-O-Y.
I think my Rebbeim used to translate it as pronounce it as koi.
Koi as well. I had a rebbe who told me that his rebbe pronounced it T, but I guess it goes closer to Messiah. It's an old argument.
The question I asked my client on Thursday night at the publisher by his house. He asked if anybody had any questions.
Right.
The question at all. So I'll ask one question. Is it with share or shear?
Very good. Okay.
I say potato, you say potato.
If who can be he, then kvi can be koi.
So Pinchas Yosef is saying that Polish should say kvi and Litvish should say koi.
I was just gonna say Hungarians like kui.
Hungarians say hala, and Polish should say chawa. And if you're both, you say hawa. How we doing? Dr. Gemara Tanu Rabbanon. Ta'anu is nafsher seichem. Now it says a loshon of inui 5 times in the Torah. Some of them are in Parshas Achremois, some of them are in Parshas Emor, and some of them are in Parshas Pinchas, which are the 3 times that the Torah talks about Yom Kippur. So let's run through this more. It's very easy. Ta'anu is nafsher seichem. Yochel yoshev b'chama. The Torah says you have to be be'inui. So maybe it means you should sit out in the sun and you should sweat and be uncomfortable. Or maybe sit out in the cold. So you should be in a matzah of inui. The Isser inui is compared to the Isser malacha. Ma malacha shav tasa. Just like the malacha means refrain from doing an action, shav tasa, refrain from doing an action. Sitting in the sun is not refraining from doing an action. In fact, maybe in addition to not eating and not drinking, maybe as well you should refrain from doing an action relative to these issues. Maybe if a guy somehow he ended up sitting in the sun, he's sitting out there and all of a sudden it gets really, really hot. Maybe it would be also to move, which happened to me the last Yom Kippur when I was davening in the tent. I got very hot and I wanted to move to a different place. Maybe it's also to move because that's a shav tasa. Or the opposite, Yosef Batula, if you're sitting in an area where it's cold, the car of you're cold, maybe loy name kum toy b'shimshe. You don't tell him, you say he's not allowed to get up, because that's also Shabbat Tasa. So tomorrow, no, that's not the category at all of inuyim that are relevant in Kippur. Dumi de malacha, it has to be similar to malacha. Ma malacha, loy chalaktaba, just like malacha, we're saying there's an action that you're never supposed to do, period. You can't say that there's certain inuyim that are subject to where you are and what you are. However, anything that you can always say across the board is also, that's the type of inuyim, and those describe the 5 inuyim. Tanidach, Tanis nafsher seichem. You have to have inui. It doesn't say what the inui is. You might think you should sit in an area which is uncomfortable. Just like malacha, you find sometimes there's a chiyuv for it. Like on Shabbos, you find malacha is also. So that's what it means over here. Af inin nefesh, so to the inin nefesh that the Torah by Yom Kippur is prohibiting. It's something shechayavin Allah b'machamacher. It's certain things that would also be usher under some other circumstances. There's never a place ever where there's an isser to sit in the sun or an issue to sit in the shade, or an issue to move from the sun, or an issue to move from the shade. But there are times where things are usher to eat. What are examples of things that are usher to eat? Beizeh, zeh pigel, beizeh, zeh pigel, v'noiser. Pigel and usher are served. So since you find the Torah in other places, users to eat pigel and noiser, so too, when the Torah said that on Yom Kippur, you have to have inui, it's referring to achila. In fact, Gemara, avi pigel v'noiser, shein b'karis. Maybe the Torah only means to aser on Yom Kippur, pigel and noiser, that have a chi of karis. But who said, well, every said tevel, shein b'chai of karis? If you eat tevel, you only chayiv mitzvah b'dei shemayim. So maybe tevel is also not included in the prohibition in Yom Kippur. But loimer tanu, there's another tanu. It says tanu v'nisa misnafsher sechem riba, which is marba even tevel, even something that only has a mitzvah b'dei shemayim. So tomorrow I'll be a tevel shuba misa, but I'll be a sinavela shein b'misa. Maybe I'm only answering on Yom Kippur things like tevel, which has a serious issue, mitzvah b'dei shemayim. Nevela is plain malchus. Maybe eating a nevela on Yom Kippur wouldn't be the issue of Yom Kippur. Okay, so obviously nevela shubalav. Maybe the Torah doesn't mean to aser achila schulin on Yom Kippur. Maybe the Torah is only asering to eat chulin because there's no mitzvah to eat bedav chulin. But maybe since there's a mitzvah to eat truma, that's not covered by the prohibition of eating on Yom Kippur. So I'll go a step further. Always that truma she'eni beval tasiru. I understand truma there's a mitzvah to eat, but it doesn't have an isser not to eat. But maybe always that kachim she'eni beval tasiru. Maybe kachim wouldn't be also eaten on Yom Kippur because there's an isser to leave them over. So this is how you know that every type of food is usher to be eaten on Yom Kippur. The obvious question you have to ask over here, let's take the first step, where the Gemara first thought that the only thing that we would answer on Yom Kippur are things that have a chi of kares. If they're already usher with a chi of kares, why do I need the isser to eat them on Yom Kippur? And besides, it's like isser chalal isser. So the Achronim talk about it a lot, but they offer different cases. For instance, let's say you're a shoygig on one and you're amazed on the other. Let's say you're a shoygig on the pigel and the noiser, but you're amazed that there'll be a chi of kares for that. So there's a lot of other enough communities where it would be you would need both, or it can be or to have a chiyuv of two, or to have a chiyuv of two malchus if we're so. So they discuss about how it would be negated. If you don't like our long drush over here that includes all the different things in the inu, all the different eatings in the inui, I have another option. It says, let's look at the pasuk. It says by the Gimel, we're talking about Yom Kippur. Avedis nefesh. When you don't eat, you have avedis nefesh. Zok to Gemara. Zok to Gemara. Harei Omer. Avedis nefesh. Inu shel avedis nefesh. The type of inu that we're prohibiting on Yom Kippur is something that's avedis nefesh. When you don't eat, it's called avedis nefesh. It's taken out of your body. The first pshat was very good to tell us you're not allowed to eat. Why do we need a second pasuk to tell you that you're not allowed to eat? If you're going to say that when it says when the pasuk of bavadis nefesh is referring to arayis, I'm sorry. If you're going to say that the psukim that are answering, what was the whole theme of the Gemara before that we're comparing it to Shabbos? The Inui is answering something that you find an Isser for it elsewhere. So who said it means food? Maybe it's talking about a rice. Maybe that's the Inui that we were referring to, because a rice is also Usser elsewhere. So for that we have a pasuk. Not eating is considered avedis nefesh, but not doing intimate, not engaging in intimacy. That's not called avedis nefesh. So the what's called avedis nefesh? The very small tana, nemer kan inui. It says inui by Yom Kippur, but nemer lahalon inui, and it says inui in the midbar. Ma lahalon inu ravoin. Just like there, it means inui of ravoin, and Rashi tells us the pasuk of ayancha vayirivecha, ayancha vayirivecha vayachilcha samon shelo yadata lo yod navisecha. So you see there, inui is referring to eating. So too, avkan inu ravoin. In fact, Gemara I could find you inui that doesn't necessarily mean hunger. There's other types of inui. The name of Tanis Benoisai, which is when the Lovin told Yaakov that you better not torture my women, my daughters, meaning you should give them intimacy. So maybe you should learn from there that that's what is being prohibited in Kippur. So Gemara done in inui derabim, may inu derabim. May done in inui derabim, may inu deyachim. Yom Kippur is an inu derabim. All of Klal Yisrael is mechuyev to be ma'anin themselves. The V'yancha Yerevecha was referring to hungering the whole nation. That's what we learned. But to compare the Inu of Yom Kippur from one personal case of Inu with Lavan and Yaakov, that's not a proper drasha. How about the Inu of Mitzrayim, which was Rabbin, which was all of Klal Yisrael? The Chesiv Vayar Esenyenu, V'amrino do preachers their cheretz. So once again, you find that even preachers their cheretz is considered an Inu de Rabbim, and maybe that's what the Torah means to prohibit on Yom Kippur. Ladonin Inu b'dei Shemayim, Inu b'dei Shemayim. We compare Inu b'dei Shemayim from Inu b'dei Shemayim. Inu b'dei Shemayim is mandated by the Shemayim for Yom Kippur. V'yancha v'yarivecha, which is something that the Rebbeinu Shalom did to us. That's a good limud. But done in Inu b'dei Shemayim, we don't define the Inu b'dei Shemayim of Yom Kippur, Inu b'dei Adam, from things that Mitzrayim did to us. I guess we should stop here because we're getting close to Shachris time. We got through most of the sugya of Inui. Okay, Valtik, I hope this wasn't too painful. I hope the sugya of Inui wasn't too painful.
Okay, Shkoyach.
Well, have a wonderful day.
Yossi, did you have a